December 19, 1944, Verdun. An old French barracks, now converted into a headquarters, housed the highest Allied commands. Around a massive table, the most influential generals were gathered in silence, without a smile, their eyes tense and minds focused on the disaster unfolding. Just 3 days earlier, over 200,000 German soldiers had broken through the American lines in the Ardennes forest, completely surprising Allied intelligence services. The U.S. units had been overwhelmed, encircled, and decimated, unable to respond effectively. To address the emergency, Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, had convened the meeting. The stakes were incredibly high. The 10th Airborne Division was trapped in Bastogne. If the city fell, German tanks could split the Allied armies in two and advance toward the coast. Eisenhower fixed his gaze on the generals and asked the crucial question: "Who can attack from the north to relieve Bastogne, and how quickly?" A tense silence fell. Everyone scrutinized maps and reports, evaluating logistics, routes, supplies, winter conditions, and the chaos caused by detaching units already engaged on the front. Suddenly, George Patton spoke. "I can move 2 divisions within 48 hours." The eyes of those present widened. Some thought it a joke, others an impossible promise. Indeed, 48 hours meant detaching 3 active divisions, rotating an entire army 90 degrees, transporting over 100,000 men and thousands of vehicles over snow and ice, and launching an offensive against fortified German positions. An apparently impossible mission, and all the generals knew it. But Patton was not bluffing. He was not seeking glory. He was the only one anticipating this offensive, and for 11 days he had been preparing every detail. December 9, 1944, 10 days before the Verdun meeting, Patton's headquarters in Nancy, France. Colonel Oscar Koch, Patton's chief of intelligence, entered with a stack of reports that could change the course of the war. Precise, meticulous, and anxious, Koch had been monitoring German movements along the entire Western Front, spotting an anomaly ignored by others. 15 German divisions had vanished. Not low-value units, but full divisions, including several armored ones with hundreds of tanks, moved in secret. Allied intelligence had failed to track them. The supreme headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Forces, the SHA, dismissed the issue lightly. They were German reserves ready to respond to any Allied breakthrough. Nothing to worry about. Koch could not convince himself. For months he had analyzed German operational patterns. The Wehrmacht would never keep 15 divisions in reserve solely to react to potential crises. This was striking power, enough to launch a large-scale offensive. He spread the maps on Patton's desk, pointing to the Ardennes forest, a weakly defended stretch where American divisions were scattered over miles of front. "General, here, in the Ardennes, the Germans could be planning something big." Patton studied the maps as Koch explained his analysis. The Ardennes was the weakest point of the Allied line, 4 American divisions facing a sector that would require at least 12. The terrain was harsh, dense forests, narrow roads, nearly impassable with December snow. And that was exactly what made Skye lower his guard. Difficult terrain to defend, certainly, but equally difficult to cross. No sane commander would choose that area for a major offensive in December. But Koch reminded Patton of 1940. The Germans had done exactly the same, crossing the Ardennes and reaching the English Channel in 6 weeks, conquering France. Other signs confirmed his hypothesis. Increased German radio traffic in the sector, prisoners talking about new units arriving, civilians reporting unusual activity behind enemy lines. Patton interrupted him with a direct question. "If you're right, when will the attack start?" "Within 2 weeks," Koch replied without hesitation. Patton picked up the phone and called Omar Bradley, his superior, outlining Koch's predictions. Bradley listened, but remained skeptical. SHA intelligence saw no threat. Germany was already on the brink of defeat. They didn't have the resources for such a massive offensive. He told Patton not to worry. But Patton, staring silently at Koch for a long moment, made a decision. "Then, let's prepare a plan." Over the next 10 days, Patton's staff worked in utmost secrecy. They developed 3 complete contingency plans, covering every possibility of a German attack in the Ardennes. Each plan detailed minute movements, truck routes, strategically positioned fuel supplies, artillery batteries ready for rapid redeployment, infantry units assigned to specific roads and rally points. If the attack came from one direction, the Third Army would execute Plan A. From another, Plan B. And if circumstances demanded a different response, there was Plan C. Many on the staff thought Patton was losing his mind. The Third Army was engaged in advancing offensives toward the Saar, over 100 miles to the south. Why prepare for a defensive emergency so far away? Patton's confidence in Oskar Koch surpassed that which he placed in Skay. On December 12, he summoned his closest commanders. Without explanation, he ordered them to be ready to disengage from offensive operations at short notice. The men exchanged questioning glances. They were advancing victoriously, yet, disciplined soldiers that they were, they raised no objections. They would follow orders. 3 days later, the Third Army was the only major American force ready to respond in the Ardennes. All other units were concentrated in their sectors, convinced the war would be over by Christmas. 5:30 a.m., December 16, 1944. German artillery thundered along 80 miles of front. Thousands of shells rained down on American positions. Behind them, infantry and tanks advanced relentlessly. 3 German armies, more than 200,000 men, overran 4 American divisions. The Americans were outnumbered almost 4-1. Freshly arrived units, which had expected a quiet sector to acclimate, found themselves fighting for survival. Lines of communication were severed. Commanders lost contact with their troops. At SHA headquarters, the first reports were dismissed as a minor local counterattack. Hours passed before the scale of the assault became clear. At Bradley's headquarters, disbelief reigned. It couldn't be real. Allied intelligence assured that the Germans were exhausted, incapable of a mass offensive. The 106th Infantry Division, recently deployed in the Ardennes, was nearly annihilated. 2 regiments surrendered, the largest mass surrender of American troops in the European theater up to that point. But at Third Army headquarters, the reaction was different. Patton received the first reports and immediately summoned his staff. Staring at Koch, he said, "You were right. What is their objective?" Koch scanned the rapidly arriving reports. "Bastogne. They want the road junction, then Antwerp." Patton nodded, quick and decisive. "Call General Gaffey. Implement the contingency plans." While other headquarters struggled to comprehend the chaos, Patton was already issuing orders. The Third Army began disengaging from offensive operations in the Saar region. Other commands would take 3 days to organize a response. Patton had anticipated everything 11 days earlier. December 19th, the emergency meeting convened by Eisenhower. The situation was critical, but the general opened the session with a phrase that surprised many. "The current situation should be seen as an opportunity, not a disaster." At this table, there will be only smiling faces. Eisenhower had noticed a detail that many had yet to realize. In launching the offensive, the Germans had left their defensive positions behind. They were exposed. If the Allies reacted quickly, that sudden strike could turn from a threat into a strategic opportunity. The problem was speed. Every unit was in the wrong place, and the logistics seemed like an impossible puzzle to solve instantly. It was then that Eisenhower asked the decisive question: "Who can move north fast enough to relieve Bastogne?" The room fell into silence. Officers studied maps and distances, aware of the vast effort required. Then Patton's voice broke the pause. 2 divisions in 48 hours. 3 in 72. The air grew heavy. Patton was known for boldness, but this time it seemed beyond audacity. It seemed sheer madness. Eisenhower leaned forward. "George, this is not the time to impress anyone. The 101st is surrounded. If we promise reinforcements and fail, we condemn them." Patton remained impassive. "Ike, the orders are already moving. The Third Army is disengaging now. I have 3 plans ready. I've been expecting the offensive for 11 days. The other generals exchanged incredulous glances. "Expecting it?" How could he have predicted an attack that completely blindsided SHA? Eisenhower studied Patton for a few moments. He knew him well. He could distinguish between exaggeration and a sincere statement. Patton was not exaggerating. Very well, George. Proceed. Patton left the Verdun room and made a single phone call to his chief of staff. 2 words were enough. Play ball. Those words set the contingency plans, secretly prepared 11 days earlier, into motion. Within minutes, the entire communications network of the Third Army sprang to life. The 4th Armored Division began its march north, followed by the 26th Infantry Division. The 80th prepared to disengage. Prepositioned convoys began loading men and materials. Artillery batteries shifted positions. Supply depots were converted from offensive logistics to preparations for a relief attack on Bastogne. More than 133,000 vehicles would move along frozen, narrow roads. Supply routes previously heading east were redirected north. Units that had been in combat that morning would be back on the front line 100 miles to the north within days. Other Allied armies watched, bewildered. They were still trying to grasp the scale of the German offensive. The Third Army, however, was already on the move. Every route calculated, every contingency anticipated, every supply depot stocked. Patton performed no miracle. He simply set in motion a plan he had already prepared. The movement began on the night of December 19th and never stopped. Think about it, an entire army, not a single battalion, but over 100,000 men, thousands of tanks, trucks, and artillery pieces, all on the move at the same time, all heading to the right place at the right moment. The weather was ruthless. Heavy snow, icy roads, freezing temperatures. Vehicles broke down, men suffered from frostbite, yet the movement continued without interruption. By December 21st, the vanguard of the 4th Armored Division had reached the designated positions. Over 100 miles covered in less than 2 days, in the worst winter conditions of decades, while disengaging from ongoing offensive operations. On December 22nd, the Third Army launched its attack. The 4th Armored Division advanced north toward Bastogne, meeting fierce resistance. The Germans had built defensive positions along every approach to the besieged town. Every mile was a battlefield. Tanks clashed on frozen fields, infantry advanced through forests and snow-covered villages. Inside Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division held firm. With limited ammunition, scarce food, and minimum medical supplies, the paratroopers faced continuous pressure. On December 22nd, when the Germans demanded surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe replied with a single word that would go down in history. Nuts! The paratroopers did not yield. They knew relief was on the way. On December 26th, at 4:50 p.m., Lieutenant Charles Barger, commanding the lead tank Cobra King, broke through the last German defenses at Eisenhower. His tank made contact with the 101st troops. The siege was broken. Patton received the news and immediately called Eisenhower. "We are in Bastogne." The relief corridor was narrow and dangerous. The Germans constantly attacked the flanks, but the Third Army held firm. That night, supply convoys delivered ammunition, food, and medical supplies into the town. The 101st had withstood 8 days against superior forces, and now they could continue fighting. The Battle of the Ardennes would last another month. The Germans did not achieve their strategic objectives, but the cost was enormous: over 19,000 Americans killed, more than 47,000 wounded, and 23,000 captured or missing, the bloodiest battle faced by the U.S. Army during World War II. The losses would have been even worse without Patton's timely intervention. If the 101st had been overrun, if the Germans had captured Bastogne, the offensive could have split the Allied armies. The failure of intelligence haunted the American command. How had over 200,000 German soldiers completely surprised the Allies? How had 15 divisions vanished without anyone noticing? The answer was clear and shocking: someone had noticed. Oscar Koch had identified those divisions, anticipated the offensive, and pinpointed the objective. But Skay had ignored his analysis. Conventional wisdom held that Germany was already defeated, and an offensive of such magnitude seemed impossible. Only Patton had listened. Only Patton had planned. And when the attack came, only Patton was ready. After the war, Allied intelligence officers interviewed captured German commanders to understand their plans in the Ardennes offensive. The German generals expected to reach the Meuse River within 4 days, Antwerp within 2 weeks, and anticipated that the American response would be slow, confused, and disorganized. What they had not accounted for was George S. Patton. The German commanders acknowledged that the Third Army's counterattack had shattered all their predictions. The speed with which Patton reacted caught them completely by surprise. They estimated that it would take the Americans at least a week to launch an effective counterattack. Patton did it in 4 days. General Gunter Blumentritt, Chief of Staff of the Run, later wrote that Patton was the most aggressive armored commander among the Allies. General Otto von Mantrafel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army in the Ardennes, added more precise details. "We knew Patton would react quickly, but we did not expect him to be ready for our attack. When his counterattack struck us, it was clear that someone among the Americans had anticipated our moves exactly. That someone was Oscar Koch. But he worked for Patton, and that made all the difference." Patton received no medals or special recognition for the relief of Bastogne. Official reports praised the Third Army, but rarely mentioned the 11 days of preparation that had made the lightning-fast response possible. Koch remained virtually unknown outside military intelligence circles. His prediction of the offensive, one of the most accurate of the war, was overshadowed by the broader narrative of surprise and Allied recovery. Yet, within the Army, the lesson was clear: intelligence is only valuable if commanders act on it. Preparation only works if leaders trust their planners. SHA's failure did not stem from incompetence, it was the result of flawed assumptions. Analysts assumed that Germany was already destined for defeat and filtered all information through that lens. Koch approached the facts differently. He assumed nothing. He evaluated what the data actually indicated. But having excellent intelligence was not enough. Other commanders had received his analyses. Bradley was informed, Skay saw the reports. All ignored them. Patton did not. He trusted his intelligence officer and prepared as if Koch were right, and everyone else wrong. At the Verdun meeting, the other generals were incredulous when Patton spoke of 48 hours. They thought he was exaggerating, but he was not. He was simply doing what should have been obvious to anyone who had read the data correctly. The Battle of the Ardennes remains an example of intelligence failure at the highest levels, but it is also the story of a general who listened when no one else did. That is why Patton was the only one ready, not by luck nor by recklessness, but by preparation. In war, being prepared means having everything. If this story moved you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. See you in the next video.